led by Tina Marie Tyler, MSN Entertainment journalist. Peer-to-peer, and
okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to adjust this because I'm a little short. Well, good morning. Very excited to be here today, and I hope that you are ready for a very lively panel discussion this morning. The first question that I'm going to ask is a question of Chris. And I think we'll just kind of jump right into it because we don't have a lot of time, and I want to be able to open it up to questions and have plenty of time for that. Chris, on February 28, 2007, ASCAP filed a cross motion. How can we balance the needs of consumers to digest music in the method and manner best for them against the rights of music creators?
Well, the cross motion that we filed was about trying to determine what the correct fees would be for performances on the internet and mobile devices in relation to a case that we have currently with AOL, Real Networks, and Yahoo in determining what fees would be appropriate for performances of the underlying musical compositions. We at ASCAP represent songwriters and publishers for the copyright in the underlying musical work, so that when music is performed on radio and TV and in bars and nightclubs, we license that, we distribute it. The same thing holds true on the internet. So what we try to do is determine what reasonable fees would be. And what we have in place available to us is a proceeding in federal court in front of a judge who will try and balance the interest of copyright owners and the interest of distributors who reap very large sums of money tied around the performance of songwriters' works. And so if we can't come to an amicable solution between ourselves, then we let a court step in and determine what the reasonableness of fees will be. So that's what we have available to ourselves in terms of having at the end, a third party determine what would be a reasonable fee, so that both people who create music and those to consume it or distribute that music to consumers can have a workable and a viable model and a set cost to deliver that product.
Quincy, this question is for you. I had the privilege of interviewing Tommy Lee, and Tommy Lee, the drummer.
Yeah, yes.
Okay. And we did actually have a very meaningful moment in this interview where he said a fan came up to him and told him that the music that he plays and performs is the background to that person's life.
Right.
And you've worked with a lot of different artists. Can you talk to me a little bit about maybe the difference in producing and working with the artists and dealing with their content, knowing that content can be free and available on the internet before it's actually officially released?
Can you repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
How do you work with the artists who are the content holders or the copyright holders of this music? Is there anything that you do differently in working with them, producing as well as putting together the marketing ideas, when you know that there's a possibility that their intellectual property, the music, could possibly be available on the internet before its release date?
Right, I see. Well, I think I've switched in '99. I did 20 years of music production, worked with Tupac, LL, and most of the urban artists. And I switched recently to doing video, so I can speak on that a little bit. And I think the way to do it is kind of know, if you have a proper business model in place and you know what your end result is, you can use, seeding content as a way to drive traffic to the artist's website, to iTunes, to whatever. So I think one of the things that we're doing is we're working with a company called Skywriter, and we're doing an experiment with some QD3 content there. And what they do is they attach ads to peer-to-peer networks is a really, really smart way to do it. So it's kind of like jujitsuing the energy. Kids are already downloading, they're doing their thing, so that's a way to attach a business model to it.
Okay. And Chris, I'm going to ask you another question. In 2006, ASCAP welcomed about 40,000 new members, according to one of your press releases. And ASCAP also enjoyed a 70+% growth in internet and wireless revenues. Kind of piggyback on what Quincy talked about, financial models and different business models. How has this success come at the expense of users and up-and-coming songwriters and composers and lyricists who need the promotion, and juxtapose that to the exposure that the internet can provide to these up-and-coming composers?
Well, I think that the simple phrase would be balance, and what we're trying to do is strike a balance. And you know, for any up-and-coming artist or someone who wants to get exposure, you know, there's a balance that comes for it. There's a balance of, I need to be exposed, and how do I do that? At the same time, you've created something, you'd like to be compensated for it. And while our revenue growth in the internet has been, you know, pretty good, you're still talking about, frankly, very insignificant dollars, because most of the business model is up on the net. Aside from some of the companies I had mentioned before, most of the other companies are not making. It's really, what we're seeing right now is even though it's now 12 years later since we issued our first license, the business models are now finally becoming ready. They match up with the broadband applications. So what we're trying to do is balance the need for creators to get exposure and drive themselves. At the same time, those who profit from giving exposure and who may make 5 times the amount or 1,000 times the amount of money that they may offer to artists for their exposure. What we hope we can do in the marketplace is strike a balance, so that through blanket licensing, we essentially offer our entire catalog, make it available, at the same time be able to collect royalties so that those who create can continue doing what they're doing. So it's really about trying to strike a balance at the end of the day. It's not easy to do, but that's what we're trying to do.
Michael, this next question is for you. Streamcast Networks is the creator of Morphus, the sharing software. And according to CNET, over 145 million copies of the software have already been downloaded.
165 million.
165, well, good
Yeah.
for you. How has your software benefited users and content creators?
Well, as far as benefiting content creators, it has given a lot of exposure to lots of artists. Recently, we did a promotion with Jay-Z and Coke. We just signed on to another promotion with 50 Cent. They'll be rolling out in the next couple weeks. There's been a lot of independent labels like Terry McBride's Network Music that has embraced Morpheus and other peer-to-peer networks for exposure. And overall, peer-to-peer file sharing could be the biggest boon to content creators and copyright owners, as big of a boon as it has been to the iPod makers, to broadband, selling broadband subscriptions, and for the legal profession. But it's going to take, it won't take the lawyers. So no matter how many lawyers you throw at this, no matter how many lawsuits you have, is not going to solve the problem of monetizing user behavior. It's going to take business decisions, and we really need to get there.
Okay. With the growing litigation, and we've talked quite a bit about that, we obviously heard in the news yesterday about Viacom and Brian, can you talk about maybe the way in which litigation is used to try to get two parties back to the bargaining table?
Well, I don't really have any experience with that firsthand other than reading the trades, but I think it's an interesting time because what we're really trying to balance in a case like YouTube is film companies have benefited immensely from the exposure of putting out little clips of the film, outtakes, trailers, teasers. And what we're really trying to do is get as much awareness as possible going into like an opening weekend. I think that, you know, that's where it benefits like a film company and maybe even, you know, TV content producers. I think where it gets difficult is that these new media platforms are like the Wild West. And, you know, you want to benefit from that exposure, but you don't want to lose the monetization of other content. You know, somehow you want to, as a content producer, you want to be able to pick and choose which content you can monetize and which content you can give away. And I think that that's really what the Viacom thing is all about right now, is trying to put the genie back in the bottle to some degree, without killing the goose that laid the golden egg. And I think everybody has the right and proper goals, but I think it's going to be difficult to navigate the mechanics of how to get there so that it benefits everyone.
See, the problem is you can never put the genie back in the bottle. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Spending time trying to do that, I think, is just wasted time, wasted money, and you really need to look for solutions. And it's not going to happen in the courts.
Where do we go from here then? What do you think are some of the possible solutions to this?
Well, rather than try to change consumers' behavior, because that's really an uphill fight, you need to monetize consumer behavior, whether through ad-supported media or subscriptions. You know, the past month there's been stories in Billboard and Business Week about how companies like the one that you mentioned, Quincy, is trying to plant files on peer-to-peer file sharing networks that will monetize it. You could probably short-circuit all the third-party companies that goes directly to the peer-to-peer companies like ours directly and get much better results. So we're hoping that happens. You know, we've been hanging in there. We've faced a lot of difficult legal reversals in the past year, but I do believe at the end of the day, we're one of the better solutions and not really part of the problem.
I've heard it said that the CD is dead. Do you feel that way as content providers and distributors?
I've been feeling like that since they started, basically. I think a direct-to-consumer relationship is really what it's all about. And I think one of the reasons for the decline in the music industry, one of them, a contributing factor, is the fact that consumers feel like labels are getting in the way, you know, in a sense. Like they're just there to kind of the evil corporate middleman, you know. So, yeah, I mean, I think if there's a way for the artist to connect directly to the consumers and the label kind of assist in marketing and breaking the acts and then drive traffic to their worlds or whatever you want to call it, where the artist can kind of control their website, design their own merch, I think that consumers, now that they have MySpace and social networks, they want that same intimacy with the artists. And
Chris, is that why do you think your membership has kind of grown? Is that people really want to they want the users to enjoy their music and their content, but they also want to be fairly compensated?
Well, our membership has really grown as a direct result of, you know, the growth in the internet. We have, you know, as you said, 40,000 members sign up. Majority of them have come through the internet because their music is out on the internet. It's being performed on certain websites. So it's provided a whole new mechanism to grow the membership. At the same time, what we're trying to do, along with our membership, is to figure out the business models that can exist so that those who can create can be, I'll call it reasonably compensated. I won't even say fairly compensated because, you know, what one person's idea of fair is and somebody else's is totally different. And I can tell you, as someone who sits out in the audience and gets to speak on panels, you know, everybody loves the artist, everybody loves the creators, everybody wants it all out there. And when you close the doors and you sit down and begin to talk with some of these behemoth companies in terms of what may be a fair and reasonable fee, the end result is you typically wind up in court because, you know, the pendulum either swings one way or the other, and there isn't a great rush to the middle. And I have to disagree a bit with what Michael said. You know, sometimes you do need the courts because you do need someone to set a framework in a sense of what is, I'll say, what's right and wrong. And then what typically happens is business models can begin to form around those decisions, whether you like them or not. You know, you need some form of rules in place in order for commerce to really grow. It's not just about exposure. It's not just about fee. It's about, again, simple term, it's called balance. You know, how do people who create technology, who do provide a service to artists and creators to get their stuff out, what's the balance? Because at the end of the day, you can't have it swung all in a favor of someone who's willing to say to, say, an up-and-coming artist, you know what, I'll give you exposure, you sign over all your rights, you don't have anything, don't worry about it. Because, you know, what's happening is that they're starting off from a deficit. Now, that deficit exists today, which is a lot of what Quincy talked about is a typical artist-label relation. But at least, to a certain extent, the labels have ponied up some money in advance, whereas some of these other companies who provide the ability to distribute the content, they're not even giving the artist anything. All they're giving them is the chance for exposure. And from that standpoint, I actually think the labels are more reasonable because at least they put some in artist hands, as opposed to some of the methodologies that are out there that say, give us your content, we'll give you great exposure, and oh, by the way, if you can sell a T-shirt or something on the side, then you're lucky. Because there's an awful lot of songwriters who don't perform and who their method and means of creation and survival is what they get from songwriting royalties. It's real simple.
But you know, in the 21st century, make no mistake, it's going to be the consumers that decide where the marketplace goes, and the winners are those that listen to their customers.
And speaking of that, isn't there kind of the fear of backlash? The users aren't going to be angry necessarily with the artists because they can't get their materials for free. They're going to be upset and angry with the labels and the other companies. Brian, can you talk a little bit about the users, because you have some content that is award-winning, nominated. I mean, talk a little bit about that.
I think the struggle is you know, how do you compete with free? You know, you can't exist in a marketplace where there's no monetization, you know, where there's no revenue model, where people are spending labor and money to create art, and you know, there's a framework in the society that says, well, you get to work for free and we get to enjoy the fruits of your labor, and we don't have to pay for it. You know, I mean, it's just not realistic. You know, I don't know that music has necessarily gotten any better since the decline of CD sales started. I don't know that we're looking at the next Led Zeppelin as a result of MySpace. You know, so I think that some of this kind of rhetorical banter that's being batted around is really nice on a page and, you know, good speak, but I don't know that it's really practical. And I think that ultimately what will happen is that people, consumers, the real issue here is filtering. Right now, you know, anybody with a recording mechanism can put something up on MySpace. More canvases and more paints don't make more Picassos. Consumers are overwhelmed. And I don't know that what consumers ultimately paid the record labels for was music. I think what consumers paid record labels for was the expertise of nurturing talent and filtering. And I always call the example of, you know, MP3.com versus Napster. You know, I mean, both MP3.com doesn't exist anymore. It was overwhelming. There wasn't a good filtering mechanism. People weren't getting the content they wanted. Napster, on the other hand, had pre-filtered content developed by executives and artists, and it was something that people wanted.
The original Napster, though, is dead as well. It's dead as MP3.
What's that?
The original Napster is as dead as MP3.com is.
Well, I mean, it is, but you know, the point is that, you know, it evolved into what we now have with iTunes. You know, basically, iTunes is the monetized model of what Napster was. That's where it should have been all along, and it took a genius like Steve Jobs to figure it out. And you know, now we have that model, but it wouldn't have been possible without Napster in the first place. And I think this is where, on my side of the line, we really struggle to find that balance. I mean, that is the word. You know, as I was saying before, you know, we want to be able to have some control over what we give away. And if you're giving away a lot of stuff anyway, it's pro-consumer. I mean, consumers are going to get a lot of content for free, but at some point it has to tip to the other side where we can monetize content, because you just can't say everything is free, because then everything stops.
No, there's such a misnomer. Napster did not evolve. Napster was driven into bankruptcy through the courts. Their name was purchased for $5 million from Roxio. Different business, different owners.
How are we going to keep up then with the changing technology? You talk about balance, and it seems like we're on our way to finding balance. Then the technology changes, or the user or consumer's patterns of consumption change. How should we keep up with that changing technology and the consumer?
Well, you see, I don't think the issue is filtering at all. I think the issue is the internet. The internet was built to resist control, and that's the problem. And technology is always going to be light years ahead of where we are in the courts, where we are in Congress. So again, I think it goes back to the business solutions. The parent free does not mean that everybody in the food chain can't get paid. It takes business decisions, it takes the business people to sit down at the same table to come up with solutions, not lawsuits.
And Chris, I think ASCAP has actually come up with some ways in which to help members to create more value for the members in doing this.
That's one of the things we do besides, license and collect and distribute. We try the best we can to try and nurture some up-and-coming songwriters. In fact, we have a conference, we call it a Music Creators Conference, coming up here in Los Angeles in April, where the whole point of the conference, it's about songwriting. It's about how you do your craft, and then tied to that is what are some of the new ways that are available to get your music out there, to get exposure, what the process is. Because, Quincy's obviously, very involved and intimate with that. The general public, really, I think views, the whole music creation business as something behind a curtain from The Wizard of Oz. And even a lot of our members are not really sure what the process is and how do you do it. And so one of the things that we try to do is to bring people together to talk about the creative process, how it's done, what we see moving forward. At the same time, try to explain to our members, a Creative Commons license. Is that a good thing? Is it not a good thing? How do people take advantage of some of your works in a new marketplace? So that, someone once said, an educated consumer is our best customer. I think it was some guy in New York who was selling suits. But it really is the truth. As a writer and a performer today, and a creator, you need not only to focus in on your craft, but you need to make yourself up to date about what's going on in the field, what is going on in the industry, so that you can weigh out your choices. Is it good to give it away because you may see a benefit later? Or is it better to hold on to something with the hope that eventually you may be able to actually be better compensated in the future? So, it's a give and take. It's a whole unique process. That's one of the things about creating music. If only one company and one individual had the right answer, it would be done, but it's not. It's really a collaborative effort, which is one of the things that's so misunderstood when you look at copyright. Everyone just assumes the labels own all the copyrights. And what we're trying to do is get in the marketplace to tell people the answer is no. It's a collaborative effort, and therefore there are more than one rights owner into a work. And that's something that consumers, in fact, don't really quite grasp. But then on the other hand, they shouldn't. All they want is access, they want to consume, and they want to enjoy. Therefore, the companies that distribute it, repackage it, repurpose it, those are the ones who are actually making money from it. Those are the ones that should be licensed and paying fees back so that those creators can continue to create.
It's funny because, I look at a lot of chat rooms and forums just to see where kids are at with regards to these issues. And one of the things that they were saying in there is that if they felt the artist was getting a bigger share of the profits, they would support it. But, since 85% goes to the label, they're like, why should we, So it's an interesting thing. So I think the intimacy is something that they're looking for, where they feel like they're supporting the artist in their vision and what they're trying to do versus.
We covered the Grammys, and I had an opportunity to interview and talk with your father. And he was was at the Clive Davis party and obviously very passionate about music, but he did talk a lot about the business of music. Talked about some of these new and upcoming artists, as well as trying to nurture and get out established folks.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about and maybe pull the curtain up on the creative process? And are you doing anything different during this creative process, knowing that the content can be free to the user when you're working with your artists?
Pardon?
When you're working with artists.
Are we doing anything different? I think one of the things that we're doing is that I think we encourage mashups of our content. So we just launched a media company 4 or 5 years ago. We're the leading aggregator, producer, and distributor of urban content at the moment. And we sold over like 1 million DVDs with this like Ken Burns type hip-hop collection of DVDs. And one of the things we're doing there is we have a title called Beef, and it's about hip-hop feuds, and it's kind of fueling the industry right now. Kids are obsessed with feuds between different artists and that sort of thing. And we have tons of footage of 50 Cent and them going back and forth about what their issues may be. So we're offering up clips online where people could create their own beefs with the clips that we provide. Stuff like that, where you're kind of jujitsuing the whole take mentality, where, you know, some of the user-generated content that comes from those mashups we'll put up on our platforms. We have a VOD channel with Comcast and a mobile channel with Helio and Amped and so forth. So we'll put their content up on ours so it becomes a two-way dialogue and kind of use it.
I just wanted to chime in on this idea that record companies make 85% of the profit. You know, it's just simply not true. You know, there's this perception amongst consumers that, you know, record labels are these robber barons who are stealing profits from artists. As long as I've been in the business, which is 21 years, the business is a 1 in 10 model. So you've got 9 losers for every 1 winner. Even in that 1 winner, you know, we're spending the same on all of them, but the truth is that 85% that people like to quote is the money that the record label is making. I'm not making that money. There are publicists, there is physical retail. Every time you walk into a record store, if you see a record that's not right in the bin, if it's out in front, if it's got a sales sticker on it, if there's a poster, all of that is paid for. Radio promotions cost money, marketing costs money, publicists cost money. You know, all of these associated costs, especially in physical product, is where that money goes. And so, you know, an artist can say, well, you know, I'm only getting this much, but they're getting that much. But ask the artist, you know, who's paying the tour support? Where does that tour bus come from? How does the radio promotions guy get paid? And, you know, what we try to do is we're trying to really look at that model critically, be partners with the people that we're in business with and say, how would you best like us to spend the money in this pie? How does it best benefit all of us? Because, you know, the economics are changing. And that's really what we're trying to do is to redistribute those economics to make sense in the new model. But this idea that, you know, record labels are robber barons, I mean, you know, anybody can wave a flag and write an editorial, but, you know, in 21 years, and I'll put this challenge to everybody in this room, if you've got a better way of doing it, show it to me. I mean, I could be wrong, so just show me how it works another way, and I'd love to see how you sustain a business.
I think it's called the internet. Digital distribution media is the most efficient form of distribution there is. Just think about this. You don't need a UPS truck to go from your pressing plant to your warehouse, to your distributor, to your store, and then back again to return it all. You don't need to have a sticker on a shelf and have merchandisers out there when everything shifts to the internet for digital distribution media. Unfortunately, change never comes from within. The incumbents will be the last to embrace anything new. Too busy protecting their existing business model. Take a look at, for example, some of the big brands today on television. Back in the day, CNN coming out with a 24-hour news channel was revolutionary. Nobody thought it was going to work. Look at it today. MTV, same thing. So it is evolving, and it's much more efficient.
We have about 10 minutes left, and I'd like to open the floor to questions, and I knew I was going to have some from here. Wait for the mic, please.
My name is Vicki Maklatayat. I started a label called Gospel Centric, the #1 gospel label in the world. I wish I had made 85% of anything. It's not real. I had one artist named Kirk Franklin, has sold about 16 million records. We sold it after I put my house up 3 times for that 85% you're talking about that's not real, to Sony BMG, and we have kept our publishing on all of our major artists. I do think the labels have to evolve, but I think one of the biggest problems is that we haven't controlled the hype and the lies that are out there that we're a bunch of robber barons. The publishing copyright is often not owned by the artists. Some of these artists that are doing so well are because of little people like me in the background who said, that sounds like junk, do it this way. I'm not money like this, let's do that. And a lot of you act like we don't exist at all. I call a lot of this crack economics. It's not real. One of the reasons you may have someone who gets a lot of hits on MySpace, but they can't sell records. I do believe that there has to be a real balance, but this silly notion that all record labels are making a lot of money, you're not looking at the great independents that are out there that have made music work. We get bought up. A lot of us come up with the new ideas. I agree we do have to come together with the internet, but free is not happening either. We need to be compensated for what we do, and I think there needs to be recognition and education for what we're about and how this system really can work right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do we have any response from any of the speakers, the panelists? Panelists?
I mean, just, as long, artists, because they are more highly visible, have a more vocal platform to express their position, and record labels have been demonized for a long time. And again, all I can say is that, we try very, very hard these days to make an amicable model with our partners. We don't have a lot of artists on our label. We're doing soundtrack albums, so we work with a lot of third parties. And in all negotiations, we try to make the most fair and equitable deal possible. We're probably a very weird record label in that I don't own anything. I don't own masters, I don't own publishing, I don't even own the artwork. Everything that I do is repackaged third-party content. And so, we just do the best that we can to make fair deals for everyone. But, I totally agree. It's really hard. People want to demonize record labels. But again, if you want to get rid of record labels, that's fine. BMG don't merge because business is good. We may live in a world without record labels, and then everybody can get their music from MySpace, and maybe that's the way that it goes. And if that's what the people want, that's what the people will get. I'm not really defending record labels in so much as an institution. It's just saying things are evolving, and if that's what people want, that's what they'll get.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay.
Hi, Douglas Warshaw, still employed by MotionBox, one of the founders. I'm very involved in user-generated content. And my question for Christopher especially is, the record music business got a pretty bad name by going after individuals and suing them. And I'm curious to know from you and the other people on the panel your feelings towards individuals who use music to put it on soundtracks of personal videos that they may have on their site or mashups, and are those people going to have to worry about being sued by ASCAP or BMI, or what's your position on that?
Thank you.
We're struggling. Again, the word is balance. I mean, nobody wants to stop an individual from, the best weapon that we have is consumers being passionate enough about somebody to help promote the artist. On the same time, there has to be a line when that crosses over to losing all revenue models. That's really what we're struggling with. If it was an easy one-line answer, I don't think we'd be sitting up here today. That's what we're trying to figure out.
Chris?
And what you're seeing is really the transitioning of this whole entire business, how music is developed, how it's created, and how it's distributed. So, typically, as Michael alluded to before, laws tend to eventually catch up to changes in technology and stuff like that. And we'll have to see, as was just said here, again, it's the balance, who's using it, what do they want to do with it. Some artists, as Quincy talked about, all roll into mashups, and there are others that aren't. I mean, others are, very personal. It's their art. And whether we like it or not as consumers, some would not like to see some of their music used in certain ways. And so there's a fair use part in the copyright law, but, balance that has to be struck. And those things, as they continue to evolve, we'll see where the law moves, and we'll see what happens.
But, the specific question really is, it's not so much about the law, it's how the law is applied. And when you say it's difficult to discern, I mean, the classic is, Potter Stewart's line about pornography. I know it when I see it. If I go to some individual's website and see their home movies done to, piece of a soundtrack that's obviously an ASCAP or a BMI piece of music. The question isn't what the law will do. The question is, are you guys going to go after those individuals, or are you going to recognize it as personal use and say, look, this is not being done to promote, you know, some store or some business. This is being done by an individual. We're not going to go after these people. I think it's much more of a policy question than it is a legal question. I'm curious, Christopher, how you'd react to it.
Okay, and I was able to hear the last part a little more clearly than before. I mean, we haven't in the past. We don't go after wedding video photographers and start ripping the cassettes out of their establishments. So I think if you want to draw the analogy that way, I would think, look at what we've done in the past, and the answer is we haven't. What begins to complicate things is the fact that the way things are distributed up on the internet, who may take it and then who may do something else with it and put it into an area where there's advertising tied to it, other things, that then begins to complicate the issue. So what we have to do is we have to look at it on an issue-by-issue basis. But the basic analogy that you talked about, we at ASCAP have, you know, much more important things to go after in terms of large networks or large distribution companies. Right now, their idea of a fair payment to a songwriter and my idea is something of about you know, 180 degrees difference.
Okay. Thank you for your question. Thank you. More questions? Over here.
Hi, I'm Robert Stevenson, and I have a record label for 25 years, but I also have a social network which is aimed at students and teenagers in particular, and we have an educational program in schools. I think, to answer one of the panelists' questions, is there a new way? And the answer is yes, there is. And if you like, it's a middle path. And it's taking some of the best from both worlds and making it work. And, you know, if you can understand that there is absolutely a new business model there, and it is true what one of the panelists said, is that the established labels have too much invested in the old model, if you like. And it's very hard for them. It's like a tanker heading towards an iceberg, or they can't just turn in time because they're just too big and too slow. The new model basically is about empowering young people and teenagers, because all of the famous artists that were still buying the records, the Beatles and everybody else I can think of, they're all teenagers when they were making those songs, and they're the people that need to be actually, we need to focus back on again, because that's the future of the music industry. The teenagers' habits have changed, and nothing that any panelist is going to say is going to change that. So you've got to actually go. Kids are going. They're leaving television, they're going to the web. They're creating their own content, they are being empowered, and the way to do it in the future is to empower teenagers, give them the tools they need, and then share fairly with them the profits, because, you know, there is a very important need for all of the publicists and everything else, but there's a balance, and that's what I'll say. There is a new model. I know what it is if you want to talk to me afterwards.
I would agree with that 100%. I would agree with that 100%.
Great.
And also, I think incorporating, kind of merging like visual media and music. Like, for instance, we did this one DVD where we had a bunch of well-known artists on the DVD, and we had a completely unknown artist named True Life, and it was on the Beef DVD, and Jay-Z was watching the DVD just as entertainment in his limo one day, and he saw this clip of this unknown artist, and he was like, basically, this artist has already told his story. All we need to do is put his music out. And True Life to this day hasn't dropped an album yet, but he signed a Def Jam straight under the Jay-Z, and when he walks down the street, everybody knows who he is, but they have, and I think that's another way, is to kind of build artists as human beings and movements before you even drop the music, so that people fall in love with the artist versus just the hit single. Because I think the hit single-driven business is also probably declining, yeah.
We have time for one more question. Do we have any more questions?
One more.
Great. Well, thank you very much to our
Thank
music
you.
panel.
Thank you very much,
Great
panel. Thank you.
panel.